For years, he vanished. The son who walked away. No promos, no interviews, nothing. Fans thought Shane McMahon was gone for good, erased from the history he helped write. Until that night. Out of nowhere, the familiar sound of synthesized cash, the music hits, and the crowd explodes. As a simple figure, defined only by a baseball jersey, steps out, he grabs the microphone. He looks straight into the camera, right at us, and he says, "You can't kill me!" The arena goes silent for one agonizing second, then boom, the loudest pop of the decade. What brought Shane O'Mac back after all these years of exile? And who was he coming for? This one sentence, this changes everything. It wasn't the words themselves that were so shocking. Wrestlers say dramatic things. It was the way he said it. There was no theatrical boom in his voice. It wasn't a catchphrase. It was a statement, a quiet, cold, six-word truth that landed in the center of the ring with the weight of a tombstone. "You can't kill me." He said it to the camera, but it wasn't for us. He was speaking to someone in the back, someone powerful. The arena noise died instantly. You could hear individual coughs. People looked at each other confused. Kill him? Was this part of the show? The silence was terrifying. It was the sound of a fourth wall not just breaking, but being pulverized. And then came the explosion. It wasn't a cheer of joy. It was a human shockwave, a sound of realization. The audience understood, in that moment, that this was not a performance. This was an accusation. The prodigal son hadn't just come home. He had returned to burn the house down. He stood there, letting the noise wash over him, not smiling, not pandering. He just breathed. He had waited years to say that, years of being marginalized, forgotten, pushed out. He had held that sentence in his chest until it was radioactive, and he had just detonated it live, on global television, in his family's ring. The show's timeline was in tatters. The script was confetti on the floor. In the gorilla position, the backstage nerve center just behind the curtain, there was no celebration. Usually, a surprise return like this, a pop that loud, would have producers and agents high-fiving. Tonight, there was only ice. The imposing figure of the father, Vince McMahon, stood motionless. He didn't turn to his headset. He didn't bark an order. He just watched. His shadow on the wall was the only thing that moved. Beside him, his daughter Stephanie and his son-in-law Triple H, the heir's apparent, stared at the screen. Their faces, simple lines, were frozen. This wasn't the return they had authorized. The music? Yes. The entrance? Fine. But that line? That was off script. That was a rogue element. It was a declaration of war. In this world, you control the narrative. You never let the narrative control you. And Shane had just hijacked the entire story. When Shane finally walked back through the curtain, the wall of sound from the arena cut off instantly. He was met with total silence. He didn't look triumphant. He looked empty. He had fired his only bullet. He walked past his father, past his sister. No one spoke. The air was so cold you could see their breath. A single producer, a man in a headset, made the mistake of saying, "Great pop, Shane." Shane didn't even look at him. He just kept walking down the hall, alone. The next day, the entire media ecosystem was on fire. This wasn't just wrestling news. This was business news. This was family drama. The phrase, "You can't kill me," was screen-grabbed, looped, and analyzed by everyone. What did it mean? Sports journalists, who usually mocked the industry, were suddenly silent, treating it with the gravity of a political assassination. They weren't talking about a storyline. They were talking about an exile. The word exile was key. It implied a deliberate, malicious removal. Pundits debated. Was this about his firing years ago? Was this about his new ventures outside the company? Or was this about the inheritance? Who was you? Was it his father, the king? Was it his sister and her husband, the new power? The company, WWE, did the only thing it could. It released a sterile corporate statement. "We are thrilled to have Shane McMahon back as part of the WWE family. We look forward to his contributions." It was like trying to put out a forest fire with a glass of water. It was corporate armor against a deeply personal spear. The statement's weakness only confirmed what the fans already knew. This was real. The carefully constructed wall between the McMahon family on screen and the McMahon family in boardroom was gone. Shane, with 6 words, had exposed the rot in the foundation. The world was now watching not for a match, but for the next crack to appear. The fans felt it differently. They are the ones who remember. They weren't just analyzing the business. They were feeling the betrayal. We, the audience, had watched this family saga our entire lives. We watched the father battle his own son in the ring. We watched the billion-dollar princess grow into the authority. We watched Shane, the boy wonder, the one who wasn't afraid to jump off anything, the one who seemed to have the most heart, just disappear. We accepted the story we were given. He left to pursue his own business to prove himself. We respected it. But You Can't Kill Me ripped that story to shreds. It recontextualized everything. Suddenly, his leaving wasn't a choice. It was a banishment. Every past sibling rivalry match now looked darker. Every time he was passed over for a corporate position, it felt less like business and more like a personal shunning. We realized we weren't just watching a show. We were watching a quiet, internal war for the throne. And Shane's death was his erasure from the company's history. His return wasn't just for a paycheck. It was an act of profound defiance. He was fighting for his legacy. The fans were no longer just spectators, they were witnesses, and they had just chosen their side. They were on the side of the man who was told he didn't exist anymore. In the days that followed, the world waited for one man to speak. The father, the architect, the man who built this entire universe from smoke and muscle, Vince McMahon. But there was only silence. His absence was a presence. It was a vacuum that pulled all speculation toward it. Did he know Shane was going to say that? If he did know, it meant he sanctioned his own son's public accusation against his other children. It meant this was a test. A cruel, elaborate piece of emotional theater to see who was strong enough to survive. But if he didn't know, that was almost worse. It meant, for the first time in his life, Vince McMahon had lost control. It meant his son, the one he cast out, had returned and done the one thing no one else had ever dared, seize the microphone and the narrative from him. Legacy. That's the only thing that matters to a king. The family name on the building. Shane's statement wasn't just about himself. It was a crack in that legacy. It suggested that the foundation was built on betrayal. It suggested the family eats its own. For years, the story was, Shane left to prove he was worthy. Now the story was, Shane was pushed out to see if he would break. And he just announced to the entire world that he didn't. The father's silence was the sound of a king realizing his heir might be the one he tried to destroy. For the sister and the brother-in-law, this was not a family reunion. It was an invasion. They were the ones who stayed. They were the ones who endured the corporate grind. They navigated the investor calls, the creative meetings, the scandals. They put on the suits and smiled for the cameras. They earned the throne that Shane had, in their eyes, abandoned. They were the future. He was the past. And then, with 6 words, he made them the villains. You can't kill me? Who else could he have been talking to? It was aimed directly at them. It implied they were the ones who held the knife. It implied his years in the wilderness, his exile, was their design. They had spent a decade building their image as the stable, corporate successors, the authority. And in one night, Shane recast them as the wicked siblings from a dark fairy tale. The public loves a prodigal son. They are rarely so kind to the ones who stayed home and ran the house. Shane's return wasn't just a challenge for a spot on the card. It was a direct challenge to their legitimacy as heirs. He wasn't just coming for a match. He was coming for the crown they already wore. And the worst part? The crowd was on his side. He had turned the entire fan base against them without ever saying their names. But what were those years in exile really like? We imagine him plotting his return. We imagine anger and vengeance. But the reality was likely something quieter, lonelier. The exile wasn't a physical prison. It was a prison of relevance. He was gone, wiped from the history books. Imagine building a house, pouring the concrete, framing the walls, hanging the pictures. And then one day, you aren't allowed inside anymore. You watch from across the street as your family changes the locks, repaints the rooms, and eventually stops mentioning you at dinner. He watched the show he helped build. He watched new stars be created. He watched his sister and brother-in-law take his place in the narrative. His greatest moments, the jumps, the battles, the risks, were they still canon? Or were they just footnotes in a history that was being actively rewritten to exclude him? The silence from the company wasn't just professional, it was personal. It was his family. This is the death he was talking about. It wasn't physical. It was the death of his contribution. The slow, quiet, deliberate fading of his name from the annals he helped write. He wasn't fighting for money. He was fighting for his existence in the company's story. He was fighting for the right to be remembered. So let's look at that line one more time. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a boast. It was a realization. It was the sound of a man who had finally, after years in the cold, understood the rules of the game. The game isn't wrestling. The game is legacy. And "you can't kill me" meant "you can't erase me. You can take my name off the internal documents. You can stop playing my music. You can give my spot, my office, my role to someone else. You can try to pretend I was never born. But you cannot kill the memory. You can't kill what the fans remember. You can't kill the footage of the man who jumped off the cell. You can't kill the pop." He wasn't just speaking to his family. He was speaking through them to the entire mechanism of the machine. He realized his true power was never his last name. It was his connection to the crowd. His family controlled the company, but he controlled the narrative because the fans remembered him when the company wanted them to forget. His exile, the very thing meant to destroy him, had instead preserved him. It made him a myth. While the others were on TV every week becoming familiar, he was becoming legend. And in that moment, holding that microphone, he weaponized that myth. The public part was over. The show ended. The trucks were loaded. The arena was dark. Now, the private war. Shane walks into that office. The father is there. The sister. The brother-in-law. There is no shouting. Shouting is for the ring, for the cameras. This is cold. This is business. The father speaks first. His voice is gravel. "You embarrassed the brand," the sister adds, her voice sharp. "You embarrassed us. You made us look like monsters." Shane doesn't apologize. He doesn't yell back. The adrenaline is gone. He's just a son again. "You tried to pretend I didn't exist," he says. His voice is quiet. "You took me out of the video packages. You took me out of the credits. You left me with nothing." The air is thick with decades of jealousy, of perceived slights, of fighting for a father's approval. "You can't kill me," he says again, but this time it's not a roar. It's a whisper. It's a plea. "Stop trying to make me disappear." And in that moment, the family realizes this was never a power play for control of the company. This was a desperate play for his identity. He didn't want the throne. He just wanted his chair at the table. The meeting ends. No resolution. Just a cold, hard understanding. The exile is over. But the family is broken. In the weeks that followed, the story faded. As it always does, the machine did what it does best. It absorbed the rebellion. Shane's cry of anguish became a t-shirt. His real, personal pain was repackaged as a storyline. He was given a match. He did his high-risk moves. The fans cheered. It all felt normal again. It seemed like the family had won. They took his righteous fire and they sold it. They proved that, in the end, they control the narrative. The house always wins. But then, we see one final image. The father, Vince, alone in his office late at night. He's not looking at spreadsheets. He's watching an old tape. He's watching his son, years ago, jump off the high cage, watching him risk it all. A producer enters the room quietly. "Sir, the ratings for the Shane segment are through the roof. The t-shirt is sold out." The father doesn't turn around. He just stares at the screen, at his son's defiant flight. And we see, just for a second, the faintest hint of a smile. What if the exile was the father's plan all along? How do you forge steel? You put it in the fire, and then you cast it into the cold. He exiled his son not to break him, but to see if he had the same fire he did. "You can't kill me." That wasn't an accusation. It was the answer the father had been waiting for all along.